Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. And welcome back to our sessions here at the Council on American Islamic Relations when we are talking about the history of racism and resistance in the United States of America. And this particular class is a special class, and I plan on learning quite a bit from this class, God willing, inshallah. We have a special guest speaker that's from out of state, actually, that will be addressing us from the West Coast. And today's session will be a quick history lesson on the background and the unfortunate event that took place in which American citizens of Japanese descent were put in concentration camps, not abroad, but were placed in concentration camps here in our country, the United States of America. And with us this evening is Sister Joyce Okazaki. Excuse me if I'm not pronouncing the name properly, but she's joining us from the West Coast, and she actually is a survivor of the concentration camps. She lived there for 2 years, so we are very honored and privileged to have someone such as yourself with us that not only knows the background and the actual history from a book sense, but you have a level of experiential knowledge, given that you were there and your family members were there, and so we're very honored to have you this evening with us. We're truly honored. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me speak to your class. I'm very honored to be requested to do this. The history of incarceration of 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans in concentration camps does not start with the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. It begins with the start of racial prejudice against the first Asian immigrants, the Chinese, and continues with legalized discrimination against the Chinese who came to California during the gold rush of 1848, and the discrimination continued until the Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, barring all Chinese laborers from immigration upon pressure from the labor unions and elected officials. A shortage of labor for menial jobs resulted, and the agricultural industry looked to Japan, who prohibited Japan from leaving the country to work. The United States government pressured Japan to allow workers to come, and in 1884 they started to arrive, first to Hawaii and eventually to the mainland. Okay, where am I? Because laws passed earlier were still in effect, these were laws that were passed when the Chinese were here in the mainland. Japanese were not allowed to join labor unions, so they formed their own unions and, together with the Mexican workers, conducted their first successful strike in 1903. As soon as Japanese workers had enough money, they bought or leased less desirable land and developed it into rich agricultural areas. Anti-Japanese campaigns sprang up, resulting in acts of violence and lawlessness. This legalized discrimination continued when California officials asked the United States government to stop all immigration from Japan. President Theodore Roosevelt issued Executive Order 1907 to exclude all Japanese laborers. Eventually, the Oriental Exclusion Act was passed in 1924, prohibiting all immigration of Japanese. But between those years, men returned to Japan to marry or bring back their wives, and bring back their wives, or sent for picture brides, who then married and established permanent roots with families, resulting in an American-born generation. The California Alien Land Law in 1913 was passed to bar owning land for those who are ineligible for citizenship, directed specifically against the Japanese. Going back in history, the Act of 1790 allowed citizenship to aliens who were free, white, and resided in the United States for 2 years. This act excluded Asians from becoming citizens. Many found ways around the alien land law by buying land in their citizen children's names. The California state government tried to block such practices, but in 1915, the Harada family of Riverside, California, took their case all the way to the California Supreme Court and won the battle to buy land in their children's names. Subsequent attempts at gaining citizenship through the U.S. courts failed. Japan, of course, was not a model country. In 1937, they invaded China and moved into other Asian and Southeast Asian countries. To counteract these invasions, the United States, Britain, and Dutch East Indies organized an embargo on exports to Japan in July of 1941, cutting off greatly needed oil supply. The United States had broken the top secret code of Japan, and they were aware of a potential attack by Japan. Curtis Munson, a special investigator, was assigned by the government to check on the Japanese American communities in Hawaii and the West Coast. He reported back a month later, in November of 1941, that the Japanese Americans were extraordinarily loyal to the United States, and the immigrant Japanese were no danger either. Reports from the FBI and the Office of Naval Intelligence also reported similar findings. All of these reports were kept secret by high government and military officials, and the public was not told. The prejudice continues, as those who wanted to exclude all Japanese from the United States intensified their efforts. The mass media of newspapers, radio, and film joined in. The Japanese Americans were unable to counteract the false depiction of agents of Japan, and newspapers spread the yellow peril myths on the West Coast. They had no access to media to state that they were loyal and patriotic citizens. On December 7th, 1941, Japan's military attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and the Philippines. The FBI went into action immediately, arresting over 2,000 people of Japanese ancestry throughout the United States and Hawaii. The FBI had previously listed potential suspects in preparation for the attack. The United States declared war on Japan on December the 8th, the next day. My grandfather was arrested the evening of December 7th by the FBI agents who were waiting at his doorstep for his return home from a family outing. He was a very successful businessman. He was taken to jail in San Pedro and subsequently moved to federal prison in Missoula, Montana on December 16th, 1941. After not finding anything to detain him, he was sent to Manzanar to join his family 6 months later. Many of the prisoners were kept for the duration of the war. Because of the success of the Japanese Americans had in agriculture and the fishing industries, political and military interests throughout the state wanted the entire Japanese American population removed. These interests, in the form of lobbyists in Washington, D.C., were supporting the wholesale removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Pressure groups and newspapers organized intense campaigns with totally false stories about spies, saboteurs, and even false attacks. This became the perfect excuse for the anti-Japanese groups to accomplish their goal of over 50 years to eliminate persons of Japanese ancestry. The California lobby pressured the government, and finally, Executive Order 9066 was signed by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt on February 19, 1942, on the advice of his military commanders, and despite the objection of the Attorney General Francis Biddle and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. The order authorized the Secretary of War and military commanders whom he may designate to prescribe military areas from which civilians could be excluded. Congress passed Public Law 77-503, which authorized prison terms and fines for violating military orders by civilians. General John L. DeWitt, military commander of the Western Defense Command, issued over 100 military orders which applied only to the civilians of Japanese ancestry. One was placing them all under curfew. Another was that all persons must leave the western half of the West Coast states and the southern half of Arizona. Approximately 10,000 people were moved to other states, but were turned away at the borders of the states and had to return home. The general then had to revise his orders and stated that all must register and stay in their homes until moved to detention camps, that they would be expelled from the West Coast. And now I go to the slideshow. So the title of my show is Why Was I a Citizen? Denied my civil rights and put into a concentration camp. Well, I happen to have read a book. It was called Justice at War by Peter Irons. And in it, he described the congressional hearings that took place in the early 80s and the decision by Congress after the hearings. And one was racial prejudice, another was war hysteria, and the third was poor leadership. So, but I always felt that racial prejudice was the main reason for why we were removed. So, if I, can you move the screen? This was the instruction that was given to most of us, people who returned home and had to register. And everybody that registered then were given tags with their family's names and number and certain instructions. And I have the instructions here, but I'm going to read to you the instructions, which for me now seems really strange. Number one, bedding and linens for each member of the family, but not the mattresses, but they provided that. We had to fill straw into bags, and those were our mattresses. Toilet articles for each member, extra clothing, sufficient knives, forks, spoons, plates, bowls, and cups for each member, and essential personal effects. And no pets were allowed, and no household goods. But number 5, there's a statement in number 5 where it says the United States government will provide storage at the sole risk of the owner of the substantial household items like ice boxes, washing machines, piano, and heavy furniture. And my parents, of course, were both college graduates, so they read that, and they had the government move all of our furniture and heavy appliances and packed. They also packed the plates and the pots and pans into boxes, and those were all stored also. And everything was delivered to us in Chicago when we moved there 2.5 years later. So that's kind of an interesting thing that I discovered later on. Okay, could you move that? See, I can't really move it, so if you will move the next one over. Okay, so most people had evacuation sales, and they sold their furniture and their plates and dishes and all that sort of thing. And if you've read the Farewell to Manzanar, where the mother broke all the dishes and things like that, well, my mother didn't do that, but we didn't have to sell anything. But my father bought a car in 1941. We could not take the car, and so he sold that. And I don't know what he got for that, but it was, not much. Okay, in the next picture. Okay, businesses had to close out in Little Tokyo area, and so all the shops along Little Tokyo on First Street were closed. But it was the wartime, and there was defense industries were moving into or starting up in California, especially in the Los Angeles area, and so we had the blacks from the southern states moved to take up jobs in the defense industry, and they needed places to stay, and so they moved into the empty uh, residence and storefronts, and of course many of the Japanese people stayed in the back of the store, and maybe upstairs there was living quarters also, so the people stayed there and kept up the place. Okay, the next picture please. Here, people were required to register after they returned. I imagine we also had to register because we did have the little tags with our name and a number on them, uh, and when we had to leave. And but we we left on April 2nd, and it was a lot. It was early also, not immediately after. The general made his announcement, but shortly after that, when uh, my aunt was a doctor, or she still is a doctor, you'll see in a picture later that she's 106 years old now. She um, she was requested with her husband, who was also a doctor, to start up the hospital in Manzanar, and so they did, and they said they both stated that they would work at Manzanar if their families could join them. And so all of us um, joined uh, and we went early to Manzanar. We left on April 2nd, and we got there fairly early. And okay, and so the next picture is when you have 100, when you order 120 or 110, 120,000 people to leave their homes, you're forcing them to leave. Where do you put them? You have to set up someplace. And so they quickly set up these assembly centers at fairgrounds and racetracks. And some people actually had to live at Santa Anita racetrack in the horse stalls. And that was really a terrible, terrible thing for them. The stench of the manure could not be taken away. It just smelled constantly, and that's what they did. They lived, and then people were then moved to, and the next, please, the next. These are the 10 campsites. I hope you can see them all. There's 2 in California, Manzanar and Tule Lake. Tule Lake is by the border. 2 in Arizona, Poston and Gila River on Indian reservation land. 1 in Topaz, Utah, uh, near Delta, and 1 in Idaho, Minidoka, and another one in Wyoming, Heart Mountain. And they may have been also on Indian reservations. I'm not sure. I think Topaz was. Minidoka, of course, is an Indian name. And then 1 in Colorado, Granada, and 2 in Arkansas, Roar and Jerome. And both of them were in swamplands. And the government uh, thought that the Japanese people could help the Indians on the reservation to help them to grow agriculture and show them how to irrigate the land. And that's what they did. So there was, at least they were growing crops. And then in Arkansas, it was a swampland. So the Japanese people showed them how to drain the swamps and have fields of agriculture. Okay, the next one, please. And this is how we looked with the tags on. This is not my picture there, but this is how many of us looked. The next one over. Next one, please. And this is waiting for the train or the bus, so, whatever. And you have to carry all that linen. Guess how you carry it? In duffel bags. That way you could stuff a duffel bag with all the linen and sheets and towels that you need, because the suitcases were kind of the size of what the little girl is sitting on, and it didn't fit very many things. Usually they had trunks in those days. Okay, the next one. And there are people waiting in line to board a bus later on. When we left for Manzanar, we were waiting by the railroad tracks near Union Station, but not very close to Union Station. They were the tracks that were probably under the First Street Bridge in Los Angeles, because if you go across that bridge and you look under it, there's a lot of railroad tracks. And we were waiting by the railroad tracks, and the armed sentries were walking up and down to guard us so that we wouldn't escape. Good heavens, who would escape? Anyway, that's what we did. And, we didn't go to Union Station. We were at the railroad tracks. Okay, the next one. This is the entry sign in the gatehouse for Manzanar. Ansel Adams took this picture in the fall of 1943. The story of Ansel Adams is that he was about 40 years old and a little too old to serve in the military. So he asked his friend, Mr. Ralph Merritt, the director of Manzanar, what he could do for the war effort. Mr. Merritt suggested that he come to Manzanar and take pictures of people living their everyday lives. And so he did. And he came in the fall of 43 and he took this picture. And if you know anything about Ansel Adams, he is a very noted landscape photographer. So, okay, move the next picture, please. Also hired were War Relocation Authority War Relocation Authority hired photographers to take pictures of people preparing to go to camp, arriving in camp, and actual building of camps, and how people were doing in camp. And so this is one of the pictures taken by Dorothea Lange in the early days. The workers were people who volunteered, the Japanese people, men who volunteered to go to Manzanar and put up these barracks. Imagine doing that. But they did. They drove there too. Okay, the next picture, please. There's another picture by Dorothea Lange where people are arriving in camp with their possessions, and they arrive there fairly early by bus, I guess. Anyway, wherever you went in Manzanar, you had to walk. And I think about it now, my parents had to walk to work every day. I had to walk to school every day, but I didn't have as far to go as they did. Okay, the next one, please. This is the picture of my aunt, Dr. Masako Kusayanagi, and her husband, Dr. James Goto, and they were giving shots to typhoid shots to people. And of course, we had to get shots too, but I hated being given a shot. So being a 7-year-old kid, and my sister was 4 years old, and I told her, let's run. And so we ran around the barrack. But of course, they ran around and caught us, and we had to have our shots. Okay, the next picture. This is the Tarpaper barrack. It was an army-style barrack, 100 feet long by 20 feet wide, and it was divided into 4 units of 25 feet each. And for one family unit, it would be 20 by 25 feet. And of course, there was one hanging light bulb and a heater, oil heater. And at the beginning, more than 2 people had to live in one unit. So when we arrived, there wasn't enough barracks built yet. So we had to move in with my grandmother because remember, my grandfather was in Missoula, Montana. And so my grandmother and the rest of her family were in the one unit and we joined them. But we didn't have to fill out the mattress with straw because that was done for us by my uncle, which was very nice. Okay, the next picture, please. There was no running water in our units, and so we had to have some kind of water because this was desert country and it was very dry. So if you had the heater on, you had to have some kind of moisture and you had to have water on top of the heater, a water kettle or something on top, so to have a little moisture in the room. But there was no running water in the units. We did get the spigots of water later on, but that was later, much later. Okay, for the next picture. Okay, Ansel Adams was not allowed to take a picture of the barbed wire fence or the guard towers. And so he got up on the guard tower and looked and took a picture of the scene. And of course, on one side, on the right side, on the left side, on the one side of the picture is a row of barracks, the living quarters. And on the other side is the fire break area. And the fire break areas where the people built recreational fields. They had baseball diamonds, football, and that sort of thing. And that was in the front of the camp. So the front of the camp is where you see the barren, the empty space. And the back of the camp is where the mountains were. And you see the Mount Williamson in the background. And it was a beautiful mountain, but of course we didn't really notice the beauty of it at that time, or I didn't anyway. And I see it now, and it's really a gorgeous mountain. And the agricultural fields were closer to the other end of the camp. Now this is a picture of how the blocks were organized, the layout of the blocks. The living quarter barracks were on 2 sides, and in the center, and this is just one block, in the center was the men's lavatory, the women's lavatory, the laundry room, and the ironing room. And the lavatories held the toilets and the showers, and there were no walls between any of it. Of course, the women wanted walls between the toilets, so they finally put walls in, but no doors, I believe. It was just walls. And the shower, of course, was still open. The laundry room was just plain tubs. And you had to bring your own washboard. And during wartime, metal was in short supply, so the washboards were made of glass. And so that we did all the laundry by hand. And then you go to the ironing room if you wanted to iron anything. But there was no dryer. Okay, this is the inside of a unit with a stove. You can see there's an oil stove. And people just hung a string across the unit and would put sheets or blankets across them to separate the units between 2 families, if 2 families had to live there. And then when one family moved out, you could make one area a sleeping area and the other area a living area. But it was still a 1 unit and 20 by 25 feet, so not that large. Okay, the next picture. And this is a picture of the metal cot with the straw mattress. Of course, the the clothes were hanging, maybe to hang up to dry, or maybe he used it for closet space. Who knows? I don't. It's just a picture taken by somebody, found on the internet. Okay, the next picture. Oh, this is a lineup for the mess hall. Mess hall 3 times a day. We heard a gong. They had a huge metal uh, tire inside of a tire, and they would hit it with another metal piece, and the sound would reverberate throughout the block, and all of us would know that it was mealtime, and we'd go and line up. And this was probably either breakfast or lunch. I don't really know, but this is what we did 3 times. This is inside of the cafeteria line, and this picture was taken by Clem Albers in the morning of April 2nd, 1942. We arrived in Manzanar the evening of April 2nd. It was dark when we arrived. But this is the picture of my aunt, and she had to withdraw from UCLA. She was a junior at UCLA, and she had to withdraw to go to camp. And she never returned to college because she then got married. But there she is with the kinds of metal utensils that we first brought to camp. And then this is the mess hall where we ate, picnic style benches and tables, not very conducive to family eating. Next page. This is the inside of the unit where you see the walls were barren, and you with a framework showing, and the furniture was of scrap metal, usually scrap wood, usually apple crates or whatever kind of wood that would be found where they were doing any kind of construction. And the next picture, please. A few months later, they covered the walls with wallboard and the floor with linoleum, and that probably was to protect us from the wind and the dust storms that occurred every afternoon, and also to protect us from the cold in the wintertime. In the next room, next schools didn't start up, and so parents were kind of concerned that schools wouldn't start. In the summertime, they asked adults or high school students or adults who would help teach students, younger students, to learn things. But I never did go to any of that. I, of course, went to Mary Knoll Missionary School, which was a Catholic school, and it was all Japanese because it was in Little Tokyo area, and they stopped school shortly after the order came to evacuate, which was probably beginning of March. So I didn't go to school the rest of that year, and school did not start until the fall of 1942, when Manzanar hired a superintendent of schools, and she organized the curriculum and hired teachers. And so, in the next picture over, this is the high school. Well, this is the students walking to high school, and this is, of course, picture taken by Ansel Adams, so you could see the beautiful mountains in the background. Okay. So people graduated. There were seniors that graduated in 1943. So they graduated when they started school in 42 to 43. That was the first class. Okay, the next picture, please. People wanted to have services. So they started a Buddhist temple. That was one of the complaints. And so they started a Buddhist temple. And of course, Buddhist priests were one of the few people that were arrested, one of the many people that were arrested on December 7th or shortly thereafter. because they were leaders of a group, but they were soon released, and they were released to go to camps and serve the people. And the next one is the Catholic Church, and of course the Maryknoll Missionary Church sent Father Lavery. Every Sunday he would drive up to Manzanar to say Mass. But uh, there were two Japanese nuns, sisters, that were also teachers, because I had them when I was in first and second grade. And one of them is pictured there outside by the tree, standing by the tree. And there's another one somewhere in the midst there. But the two of them had to go to Manzanar. And these are the recreation fields that were developed in the fire breaks. The baseball diamond, baseball was very popular in camp. Uh, Football for the high school kids, and volleyball, which my mother liked to teach. My mother was a teacher in camp. She taught physical education, which was her major. And the interesting thing is that when they hired the physical education teacher, she saw who she had to teach the first day of class. She resigned and left Manzanar. And so the superintendent then hired my mother and gave her a provisional teaching credential so she could teach. And my mother was a very good and strict physical education teacher, according to some of her students that I knew then and also ran into afterwards. Okay, the next picture. This is a picture I found on the internet of my in laws, my father in law with a hat on, and my sister in law squatting there with a little boy between them. And my father in law and sister in law lived in Block 11. My sister in law lives in Las Vegas now, but they lived in Block 11. I lived in Block 12, but I didn't know them, and I didn't meet the future husband until several years after camp was, we both graduated college. He was working, and so was I, and we were both happened to live in the same area of Los Angeles. And I met him through a blind date, a fixed up date. Okay, next picture. This is a picture probably taken by Dorothea Lange of a very dusty windstorm. And Manzanar, this happened around 3 o'clock every day. The dust would just whip up because it was a desert, and the wind would whirl around, and the tumbleweeds would go in circles. It was really nasty. We didn't like it. Some of us had to wear sand goggles to keep sand out of our eyes. Okay, the next one. This is a picture of a barbed wire fence. Now, this fence, this picture was taken by a Japanese photographer. He sneaked in a camera lens and a film holder into camp in his luggage. And while he was in camp, he had a friend build a case for him, and he put together the camera, and he then took pictures of different things. But when he first started to take pictures, the director did not know about it. Once the director found out, he was not allowed to take pictures. And then later on, he was able to focus the picture and set it up, the camera. And then they hired a Caucasian person to snap the shutter. And so that's what was happening. And but eventually, all of the people that were hired to snap the job was so boring, they all quit, and they didn't want to do it anymore. And so he was allowed to then take pictures on his own. Next one. This is the guard tower. The black and white is the old guard tower with a sentry light at the top, the searchlight at the top. The new guard tower was rebuilt, and it was placed on Highway 395. So if you travel down a Highway 395 going north to Manzanar or south, you will see it. And the searchlight is also up there, but it is very nice. Okay, the next picture. And this is a picture also taken by the Japanese photographer Toyo Miyatake. He took the picture of the three boys by the barbed wire fence. The only problem is the mountains are behind them. If they were really inside the camp, the barracks would be behind them. So that's the story of that. Now, these are the family photos that Ansel Adams took. Next week ago. This is a picture of my mother, my sister, and myself. Now, my father was not in the picture because he requested a leave, a work furlough, to go and pick potatoes in Idaho. And I often wondered why he did that. I never asked him, but I think it was to save money for his future plans to leave Manzanar. And you couldn't leave to go back to where you lived. They had to move to the Midwest or East Coast. Now, he bought us the two new dresses that we were wearing. Let's see, mine was a blue and white striped dress, and I hated it. My sisters had this really cute, ruffly dress with flowers. But that was her. And see, she's smiling with something missing. Okay, next picture. There's my mother. She's the PE teacher. And next picture. There's my sister with her mouth closed. My mother thought it was really bad manners to have a smile and your teeth showing with a tooth missing. And so Ansel Adams honored her request and put this picture in his book. So it is the picture that is in the book. Okay, this is, of course, my picture. For the reprint edition, I was very honored by the publisher of the reprinted edition to be on the cover of the book. And so this is the cover of the book. You might not be able to see it because of Anyway, the book is called Born Free and Equal. Okay, the next picture, please. Let's not linger at that one. This is the entrance to our unit, and you see where my father built some shelves for us. I don't know what the shelves were for. And we're standing there. And of course, there's a mesquite or something right next to us. There's some kind of a bush. Okay, next picture, please. There we are at this beautiful Merritt Park, built by one of the prisoners, a Japanese landscape man who just knew how to build Japanese gardens. He built this patio area with a concrete ground and the top with a cover, a beautiful patio cover, and it had a beautiful pond and a bridge. It was just a very, very lovely park. Okay, next picture. This is more of Ansel Adams taking pictures of us. We're posing for the different shots. This is, of course, shopping for dresses. And the next one is shopping for looking at toys. And of course, we're not interested in the toys. Okay, the next one over. Everything was posed. He came back in the spring of 1944 because he came in the fall of 43. He came back in the spring of 44 to take a picture of my father. But my father had gone already to back east to find a job and a place to live. And so he was gone. And Ansel Adams then wanted to take a picture of this brand new park in our block. We lived in block 12, and it was a brand new garden. And so he had us pose there. And I remember this picture distinctly because I asked Ansel Adams, I don't want to look that way. I want to look at the camera. And he said, no, I'm to look at the water. So I had to do that. That's the end of the block. This is a picture of where my grandfather was arrested the night of December 7th, on his doorstep. He was a very successful businessman, and he had a dry goods store across from LA City Hall. But when he came back from camp, he just retired, and he just did his investing. So he still was very successful at investing. Okay, the next picture, please. This is Manzanar Today. This is the new sign that was built, and it's on Highway 395. If any of you ever come out to California, to Los Angeles, or to San Francisco, it's better to go from Los Angeles, actually, to visit Manzanar. It is a national park, and there's a nice interpretive center there and nice park rangers who will interpret everything for you. Okay, the next picture, please. There's a guard tower. This guard tower was dedicated to Su Kunitomi Embry, whom was the main person who founded the Manzanar Committee and who also stood her ground to make sure that Manzanar would become a national park rather than a state park. And it is to her that we owe a gratitude for all the different camps that were now made into national parks. Okay, the next picture. This is the original stone guardhouse, and it's still there, and it's still in good condition. And the next, these are pictures taken by a friend. This friend also took a picture of the cemetery marker. The cemetery marker is for those who have died, but the Manzanar pilgrimage, which also started in 1969 with Sue Embry, was to honor the dead. And the pilgrimage is to educate people on the discrimination and racism and what happened to the Japanese and how we fought for redress and how we do a lot of different things. And pilgrimages are held annually the last Saturday of April, and we encourage everybody to come and visit Manzanar and attend the pilgrimage when they can. In the summertime or during your days off, you can come to Manzanar. This is the interpretive center. Inside, it was the old high school auditorium, which was very dilapidated because the Department of Water and Power had used it to store all their equipment, and it was very run down. Okay, the next picture, please. This is the wall that lists the names of all of the people. My name is way up there, and I could barely see it. I have a picture of it, but I deleted it from this particular show. Okay, the next picture, please. And this is the interpretive center, the interpretive exhibits, where you go there and you can do different things, find out about different things. And there's a 30-minute video that's shown in the theater. Okay. Next picture. This is a Wayside station for the auto tour. So you could take your car and drive around on the roads and stop when you see these Wayside stations and read what happened there. And some of it is very interesting. There's one at the Merritt Park. This one happened to be, I believe, where they hold the pilgrimages, right by the cemetery marker, but not at the cemetery marker, which probably, I really don't know. I haven't taken the auto tour myself. Okay, the next picture, please. This is the final picture. This is the interpretive center, and I thought I would like to show this picture because it has a picture of the flag and it's set up, and there's on one side of this little area there's the state marker, the California lands marker, historical marker from 1972, I believe, or 1972. First describes Manzanar. Okay, the next picture. Oh, you want to? It's all right. Okay, that's about the end of the show, and my part anyway. I have the others are the credits and stuff that you don't need to see.
Thank
Oh,
you
there
very
there
much.
there is one picture of the cover of the book that I show.
Okay. Let me bring that back up. Hold on one moment, please. Let's see here.
It's just have to do one. Can you do that real quickly? Yeah,
Yes. Here we go.
two down from that one.
That one.
That one, yes, that's the picture of the book, and that's all you needed to see. Thank you very much.
Born Free and Equal.
By Ansel Adams.
Thank you very much for that informative presentation. We actually have a few comments that I'm going to share. If anyone has any questions from the viewing audience, please pose your questions. I have a couple of questions though I'd like to ask if you don't mind.
Certainly.
The first one is, were there any Japanese Americans at the time in interracial marriages, and if so, were they allowed to stay with their non-Japanese American family members, or were there family separations in which Japanese Americans were taken away from their spouses and put into camps?
Um, it was their choice. The spouses could come to the camps too.
Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, there was one Mexican young student, well, Mexican American, who his friends were they were all high school students. His friends all went to Manzanar, and he wanted to join them, so he just joined them and came also. His name is Ralph Lazo, and he was very important because he wanted to join, the Japanese friends. And he didn't have to be there, but he wanted to be there because of his friends. And the other thing that's also very interesting is if you had 1/16th blood, a Japanese blood in you, and you were a baby, they brought you into Manzanar because Manzanar had the one orphanage for all of the Japanese people. And so all the Japanese babies that were orphaned or even had 1/16th blood, so they were part Japanese, they were brought to Manzanar.
Hmm. That sounds very similar to the 1/8 drop rule about African Americans and those laws as far as marriage and even enslavement, that if you had 1/8 African blood, black blood, you were considered black, even if a person looked phenotypically white. So it sounds like something that they borrowed from the laws of slavery in America. It sounds like.
I think it was 1/16th blood, though. I'm not sure. It was really far removed. It was ridiculous. I think 1/16th is your great grandfather.
Yeah.
It was Japanese.
Yeah. The other question that I have for you is the issue of reparations. Like, I know there's a reparation movement for Japanese Americans, but did Japanese American families, did all the families that were interned, did they
Incarcerated.
incarcerated,
Imprisoned, please.
imprisoned. Did they receive reparations, all those families who were incarcerated?
That's the story. The bill was signed August 11th, 1988. August 10th, 1988. Not everybody. If you were not living on August 10th, 1988, you did not get a cent. My husband, who was in Manzanar in Block 11 and eventually went to Tule Lake, the worst camp in the whole all of these camps. It was a segregation camp, and it It was under martial law and everything. He even went there. And he died on July 1st of 1988. So he didn't get anything. But his parents got it, and his sister. You had to be alive that day. So
the descendants of those people didn't get a cent, is what you're saying.
that's right. You had to be alive.
Okay.
So, like they didn't keep no money was provided for his son, because we had a son. We have a son. The son is still alive. He should be listening to me, maybe. Who knows? But anyway, he didn't get a cent. So I
Wow.
gave him half my money. But it, I really felt that sometimes people deserve it and they didn't get it. And grandparents, my parents were alive, but my grandparents were gone. And
Yeah.
so, if you're gone, you're gone.
Yeah. And then,
And they had to fight for that redress. It was not an easy thing. And I think that once that kind of thing was established, it might be a little less difficult for but who knows, I know that that's a big story now about reparations for the blacks.
Yeah.
I think they're thinking more in terms of education and that type of thing rather than a monetary thing, which I think would be fair because it would provide for the descendants and the current population to partake in it rather than those few and the people who are now gone.
I'm going to post this comment right here from Jenny. Just want to let others know that terminology has changed and we are trying to educate on the quote unquote, on the term quote unquote Japanese internment camps. The internment is used for non-citizens, for the ISA generation who were immigrants who were not able to become citizens until 1952. The term for those who were citizens, we are calling concentration camps. Okay, thank you very much for the clarification. Can we get our language right? We need to start changing euphemistic language and start calling it what it was. 2/3 of Japanese Americans were citizens of the United States. Okay, thank you. And thank you for that comment.
We skipped over that slide part about concentration camp. That was a red lettering, red words that we skipped over that. But as you know, I don't use that word. So, and Jenny is, of course, but she's just correcting terminology.
And thank you for that. That's very important. Terminology is important, and words matter. And we definitely try our best to center the preferred language of those who suffered marginalization instead of just using the terms that are in history books that in some cases were not written by the people who actually suffered the trauma. I have one other question. I don't see, and then we can conclude with your, if you have any final comments. I don't see any questions from the audience at this time. There were some statements that were made, but no questions.
Well, you can share statements too if if
right.
about me.
All right, one person says, my sister, thank you for sharing this experience with us. God willing, for sure, all of the injustices will be brought in front of God, the Almighty, the best of judge. So that's one comment, just a comment of solidarity from a
well, that's very good. Thank you very much.
American Muslim woman.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
And one other question too about the annual pilgrimage. I would assume that COVID-19 has kind of put a damper on any pilgrimages to that site. But when does that normally take place again?
The last Saturday in April, the last full weekend in April, so that there has to be a Sunday after that. Sometimes, April ends on just the one Saturday, but it has to be the full weekend. So the next one is April 24th, but it probably will be virtual.
Okay.
Our 2020 pilgrimage was virtual, and you can watch it online. I believe it's still online at our manzanarcommittee.org website.
Okay.
And
I know the Muslim community in California for several years actually goes to that.
yes,
a
large group goes there.
Yes.
We very much appreciate them.
Well, God willing, the next time it's open up, if we can get this COVID-19 situation under control, then I have the pledge that I want to come out and see it for myself, not just virtually. So, God willing, I'll fly out there and join my colleagues in California.
Oh, wonderful!
Because they're the ones who organize the trip in the Muslim community every year.
Right.
I'll fly out there, God willing. Maybe I have the opportunity to meet you.
I don't know. I'm kind of like, past that age. If you figure out my age, when I was 7 years old in 1942, and I turned, my birthday is in the middle of the year, so I turn another year. I'm not that young anymore. And so I've got to be very careful also for the COVID. My family, my son and grandson, who I think were supposed to help to watch it today. I don't know. My grandson is, I think, watching me. And he says, I should hold my head a certain way, this way, so that it's straight, and look this way. But if I do that, I can't watch you.
It's okay. It's okay. Well, thank you so much. It was so informative, and this will be saved on our Facebook page as well as on YouTube. And for those of you who are watching this right now live, I strongly suggest in the Muslim community, be you Arab American, African American Muslim, Southeast Asian Muslim, please share this video with people on your social media pages and with your family and your friends. This history is so crucial for us to not only understand what took place before, but for us to be on guard to make sure that we all stand together in solidarity, that something like this may never happen again to anyone on this soil, because it was Japanese Americans one day, and who knows who it could be next. Maybe next it could be Americans from El Salvador. It could be Americans from Iran. Like, we don't know. So we need to learn these lessons of history, and God willing, we don't, as a nation, repeat this tragic mistake that took place, or not mistake, this tragic injustice that took place to our Japanese American brothers and sisters.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. And we really, the Japanese, the people that attend the pilgrimage, stand with the Muslim community that go there. We have our MAD program in the evening, which they also participate in. Very interesting pilgrimage. You learn a lot.
Mm.
And our purpose in doing all of this is educating the public. So it's our main purpose.
Thank you very much for teaching us, and thank you very much for teaching us this evening as well. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're very welcome.
It
was my pleasure to be there presenting for your group.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And with that, to the listening audience, the viewing audience, you may go to our website, caremichigan.org, to look at the remaining classes that will be taking place for this session, or for this particular cohort, we could say, or unit for the history of racism and resistance in America. And we will catch you again next Thursday, God willing, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you very much. Peace be with you.